Days, the WNBA players are going to decide if they want to go on strike.
For almost 12 months, the basketball world got sold a story like it was guaranteed truth. Women's basketball was supposedly having its breakthrough moment, and every headline sounded like the same victory lap. Record growth, unstoppable rise, a sport finally ready to run with the men's leagues. The hype was everywhere. Media panels talked like the floodgates were open for good. Sponsors acted like the next decade was already written. And fans were told this was the turning point we'd all been waiting for. But then reality pulled up with the receipts, and it didn't care about anyone's feelings. When Unrivaled launched its second season on a major TV platform, early ratings reports said only about 107,000 people tuned in.
And if they decide to go on strike, apparently that could be the end of the WNBA.
Last season's opener reportedly brought 313,000 viewers. That's not a tiny slip. That's a drop that makes executives sit up straight because you don't lose that much audience in 1 year and call it normal. A fall of roughly 65% in viewership doesn't look like bad luck. It looks like the market sending a message. And when any sports product bleeds that much audience that fast, especially with real promotion behind it, it stops being a blip and starts looking like a verdict. Now here's where the conversation gets uncomfortable and where a lot of people start dodging the obvious. A major chunk of the new mainstream attention has been star-driven, and the clearest example is Caitlin Clark.
The WNBA cannot come back.
When she's involved, the volume jumps. When she's not, the casual crowd often doesn't stick around the same way. That doesn't mean other players aren't talented, and it doesn't mean the sport has no value. It means the sport's new audience hasn't fully attached itself to the full ecosystem yet. The rating swings suggest the general public is still learning the habit of watching women's basketball as a default, instead of watching only when a headline-level star is involved. Last year, Clark's presence created a wave so big it looked like the whole ocean rose overnight. A lot of outlets convinced themselves the entire sport had leveled up permanently, that new superstars had arrived everywhere, and that fans were suddenly hungry for every version of the product. But what might have happened is simpler. One exceptional athlete pulled in a temporary surge, and when you remove that surge, things slide closer to the old baseline. And that baseline is the scary part. Because if the floor is still relatively small, the business model can't lean on fantasy numbers. It has to lean on real demand, real consistency, and real growth that lasts longer than a viral season. That's why Unrivaled mattered conceptually. It wasn't just more basketball. It was supposed to prove depth, prove fans would show up for other names, other teams, other formats. It was supposed to show loyalty to the game itself, not just loyalty to one transcendent talent. Instead, the early viewership drop gave critics the exact opposite talking point. People started saying, if this is the test case, what did it actually prove? Because if a league is marketed heavily, placed on a major platform, and still loses a huge chunk of its audience year to year, it doesn't look like a movement. It looks like the audience tried it, enjoyed parts of it, and didn't come back in the same numbers. Unrivaled also put a lot of weight on recognizable players like Paige Buchers, pushing her as the next big thing. Reports have suggested she earned around $348,000 for involvement, which is serious money and a serious investment in star marketing. But the cold business question becomes unavoidable. If the audience number is around 107,000, what is the return on that investment, and how long can that math survive? Because once you break it down like a business, it gets awkward fast. You're paying player salaries, paying production crews, paying venue costs, staffing, security, travel, insurance, broadcast infrastructure, the whole machine. If the audience is small, the cost per viewer starts looking heavy, and heavy costs don't magically disappear just because the mission sounds inspiring. And that leads straight to the pressure on TNT or any major partner. Networks don't sign deals out of charity. They sign because they expect an audience that helps them sell ads, justify programming slots, and build momentum. When the numbers shrink sharply, the network's enthusiasm shrinks too, and that's not personal, it's business. This is where a lot of people say the quiet part out loud. Unrivaled was never only about basketball, it was also about leverage. The idea was, if WNBA players have a real alternative option, they can negotiate harder, higher salaries, better revenue sharing, better working conditions. On paper, that's smart strategy, but leverage only works when the backup plan is strong. A backup plan can't just exist, it has to perform. If the alternative product struggles to hold viewers, it doesn't strengthen bargaining power. It weakens it. Owners don't panic when the alternative looks shaky. Owners get confident. That's why the tone around negotiations appears to have shifted in public talk. Not long ago, you had players and supporters sounding ready to push all the way. Strike talk, hardline positions, strong demands. Then suddenly you hear more chatter about continuing under older structures temporarily, or playing while negotiations drag. That kind of pivot doesn't happen because everyone suddenly got soft. It happens because the market gives feedback, and the feedback changes the risk calculation. When the alternative isn't pulling big numbers, the threat of walking away stops sounding scary to the people across the table. Now, to keep this fair, CBA negotiations are complicated, and it's easy for outsiders to oversimplify. Owners don't always negotiate in good faith. Players don't always ask for unreasonable things. A lot of times, both sides have legitimate arguments and still end up in conflict because the pie isn't as big as everyone wants. But the revenue share debate is where the math gets intense. If a proposal is framed as players get a percentage of net revenue, that means after certain expenses, which is common in many sports structures. If players push for a percentage of gross revenue, that means before expenses, which can be harder to sustain in leagues where operating costs are high. And that's why numbers like hundreds of millions start getting thrown around in public debates. Whether every estimate is accurate or not, the theme is real. If you lock in a split that ignores expenses, you can create a situation where teams struggle to operate, especially smaller market teams. That doesn't mean players should accept low shares forever. It means the structure has to match the league's current financial reality while still rewarding growth. Here's what ratings do in that conversation. They act like a spotlight. Advertisers don't negotiate with feelings. Investors don't write checks based on vibes. Media partners want attention that converts into revenue, and the attention has to be repeatable. If the product can't consistently pull viewers outside a narrow set of star-driven moments, then the negotiating environment changes. Owners can wait. Networks can hesitate. Sponsors can slow roll. And that's the part the players' side has to consider strategically, because time can work against them if the public starts believing the league's popularity was a short spike, not a steady climb. Another layer is fan loyalty. In some sports, loyalty is generational and baked in. In women's basketball, especially among newer viewers, loyalty is still being built. That's not disrespect. It's just where the market is right now. If a season gets delayed or canceled, there's a real risk that casual fans don't come back automatically because their habits aren't locked in yet. And that's why the strike conversation scares so many people. A strike doesn't automatically create public outrage in your favor. Sometimes it creates silence. If viewers weren't watching regularly anyway, they won't miss it the way they might miss an established major league season. Sponsors won't always rush to rescue a product if the metrics were already soft. Networks can fill time slots with reruns that do fine. That quiet is what makes the threat dangerous. It can make the product feel optional, and no league wants to be optional. On top of that, unrivaled struggles, fair or unfair, become part of the narrative. Even if unrivaled is a different format and a different experience, people use it as a measuring stick. If we put recognizable talent on TV and the audience didn't show up, what does that say about demand? That's the argument critics keep pressing, and it hits negotiations like an extra weight. This doesn't mean women's basketball can't grow, and it doesn't mean the ceiling is fixed forever. What it means is that growth has to be built around proven demand, smart scheduling, strong storytelling, and consistent star development. It also means the league can't pretend every player creates the same commercial gravity at the same time, because markets don't work on fairness, they work on behavior. And here's the tragedy of the moment. Caitlin Clark's rise was real proof that the ceiling can move. It showed that mainstream spikes are possible. It showed sponsors can care. It showed big ratings can happen. That should have been the foundation to build smarter long-term habits across the whole league. But instead of consolidating around what clearly worked, the ecosystem started fracturing into debates, camps, and non-stop conflict. Fans argue about who deserves attention. Players argue about respect. The business side argues about sustainability. And in the middle of all that noise, the one thing that should be priority, turning new viewers into long-term viewers, gets harder. Because the market doesn't reward being adjacent to attention. The market rewards generating attention. That doesn't mean athletes who don't draw huge ratings are worthless. It means the pay model has to reflect what the business can support today while creating pathways to grow tomorrow. And that's why the next phase may not be loud and dramatic. It might be quiet and uncomfortable. If the alternative options don't perform, bargaining power shrinks. If the numbers don't jump, networks tighten up. If casual fans drift, urgency fades. Then players end up facing a hard choice. Accept a deal closer to the current framework, or push to the edge and find out what the market actually does when the product disappears. There's no magic third door that fixes everything overnight. The fantasy that ownership will panic and surrender gets weaker when ratings don't support it. You don't negotiate desperately when your opponent thinks the audience is fragile. That's why the ratings matter so much. They don't just reflect popularity, they shape leverage. The most brutal part is that Unrivaled's core mission, proving demand outside the WNBA structure, takes a hit when viewership slides. Even if Unrivaled survives, even if it improves, the public narrative right now is that the audience didn't show up the way it needed to, and when your bargaining chip looks bent, the other side stops fearing it. For years, people said the problem was exposure. Give women's basketball better marketing and the audience will materialize. Unrivaled got exposure, real promotion, major platform support, and constant conversation. If the audience still didn't hold, it suggests exposure isn't the only issue. Demand has to be built and maintained, not assumed. That's not an insult to the athletes. It's a reality check for the business strategy. Leverage isn't something you declare in a press quote. Leverage is something you demonstrate in numbers, in ticket sales, in consistent viewership, and in sponsor confidence. When the alternative product stumbles publicly, the bold statements start sounding like noise instead of power. And that's why this moment hurts, because the opportunity was real. The league had a once-in-a-generation opening to convert a superstar spike into a broader movement. It can still do that, but it requires focus, smarter storytelling, better scheduling, better officiating consistency, better presentation, and a CBA structure that rewards players while keeping the league stable enough to grow. So the real question isn't, should players strike or accept the old deal, because that's too simple. The real question is whether everyone involved, players, owners, media partners, and fans, will accept what the market is signaling and adjust strategy accordingly, or keep fighting the numbers like the numbers are supposed to apologize. Reality doesn't negotiate back, and that's the cold part. It just shows up in the ratings report, in sponsor behavior, and in how many people actually tune in when the hype fades. And right now, the signal is loud. The sport can reach big heights, but it has to build the bridge from momentary buzz to lasting demand, or the whole thing keeps snapping back to baseline.